You wake before sunrise, and for one quiet moment, England is still yours. The fire is low. The house is warm. Outside, the frost clings softly to the earth, and somewhere beyond the dark hills, history is already moving toward you. Tonight, we're not beginning with kings or battlefields. We're beginning with a small wooden house, a sleeping family, and the kind of morning that feels as though it could last forever. You are a Saxon in the year 1066, not a great lord, not a famous warrior, not someone whose name will be copied into chronicles by candlelight. Just an ordinary person in a world that still makes sense. There is smoke resting in the rafters, a wool blanket gathered around your shoulders, the faint scent of ash, bread, and cold air drifting in through the cracks of the wall. Beside you, the room is full of sleeping breath, slow and steady in the dark. Everything feels close, contained, familiar. And yet, even here, in this ordinary quiet, something has shifted. Not enough to name, only enough to feel. So settle in now. Let the room grow dim. Let your thoughts loosen a little. And together, let's drift into the last soft hours of the old English world. For a little while, there is no need to hurry. No need to remember dates. No need to hold too tightly to names. This is not that kind of history. This is the history that arrives slowly, in the warmth of a hearth before dawn, in damp footprints by a threshold, in a half-heard rumor passed from one village to the next, in the quiet knowledge that life can change long before anyone understands how or why. If you listen closely, this world is already speaking. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small sounds that make up a human life. A beam settling in the cold, the soft turning of someone in sleep, tiny hiss of an ember falling inward, a distant animal shifting in its pen outside, the faintest stirring of wind against the thatch. This is where the story begins, not at the center of power, but far from it, not in stone halls, but in timber rooms, not in the voices of men who expect to rule the world, but in the lives of people who only hope to keep their homes, their families, and the familiar shape of tomorrow. And that is what makes this kind of change so powerful. Because when history turns, it does not turn only for kings. It turns for everyone. For the farmer in the field, for the child on the floor by the fire, for the woman kneading bread in the gray light of morning, for the smith whose hands know iron better than politics, for the people who do not choose the storm, but must live beneath it all the same. If you like, you can imagine yourself here now, not as a visitor looking in from a distance, but as someone inside the room, someone waking into the cold edge of morning, someone who knows the floor by memory, the doorway by touch, the shape of the day by habit. The house is modest, but it holds what matters. A fire, a table, a little stored grain, a few tools, the people you belong to. In a world like this, comfort is simple and precious. Warm hands around a wooden bowl, a dry place to sleep while the wind moves outside, the first mouthful of food after a long morning. The certainty that the same paths, the same fields, the same neighbors will still be there tomorrow. That certainty is what makes this moment so gentle, and what makes it so fragile. Because this is England just before the world tilts, just before old patterns begin to loosen, just before distance closes in, just before men across the sea, and men already within the kingdom, begin to pull at the same crown with hard and hungry hands. But that is still some distance away from us. For now, let it remain only a pressure at the edge of the dark, a shape not yet visible, a change not yet spoken aloud. What matters first is the feeling of this world before it breaks, the heaviness of sleep not fully left behind, the pale breath of dawn not yet through the roof smoke, the hush of a home that has survived one more night, the sense, so ordinary it almost goes unnoticed, that life will continue as it always has. This is the hidden tenderness in history, and perhaps the truest part of it. Before the banners, before the blood, Before the names become important, there is always some smaller moment, like this. Someone waking, someone reaching for warmth, someone believing, for a few more heartbeats, that the known world will remain as it is. And perhaps that is why the story still lingers after so many centuries. Not only because the conquest changed England, though it did. Not only because languages shifted, laws shifted, land shifted, power shifted, but because beneath all of that was the quieter truth. Countless ordinary lives were carried with it. Lives that had their own textures, their own routines, their own private hopes, their own idea of what safety felt like. Tonight, we begin there, inside that safety, inside that drowsy hour before the day fully forms, inside a life that does not yet know how close change has come. And as we move on, we'll stay close to that human rhythm, not rushing, not crowding the mind, only following the slow turning of one world into another. So let your breathing settle again. Let the firelight in your mind burn low and steady. Picture the frost beyond the door, the quiet room, the sleeping house, the dark hills beyond it. And somewhere past those hills, beyond sight, beyond the reach of any village bell, something is already on its way. Not yet here, not yet named, only coming. For now, you are warm. For now, you are home. For now, the old world is still holding. And that is where we'll begin. You wake a little more fully now, though the morning is still only half born, and the warmth of the hearth lingers in the room, as if the night has not entirely withdrawn. The fire is low, but faithful. The dark has softened. And outside, beyond the timber wall, the first birds begin their small, uncertain calls, so faint they seem less like song than like memory moving through cold air. For a few quiet moments, nothing asks anything of you. The day has not yet opened its hands. The village has not yet gathered its voice. You are awake, but not fully claimed by morning. So you lie still and listen. There is a deep comfort in a house before dawn has finished entering it. The roof beams hold the last shadows. The straw beneath you still keeps a little of the night's shape. Someone nearby breathes slowly in sleep. Somewhere in the embers, a tiny red pulse glows and settles and glows again. The house feels small, but in a good way. Not cramped, held, away. A place close enough for warmth to matter. Close enough for a fire to soften the whole room. Close enough for silence to feel shared rather than empty. The air has layers to it. Cool near the walls, warmer near the hearth, faintly touched with smoke, wool, old wood, and the lingering scent of last night's meal. It is the scent of ordinary life, repeated day after day, until it becomes inseparable from the feeling of safety itself. You do not rise at once. There is no need. Morning, in a village like this, does not arrive in a single command. It gathers, slowly, patiently, like water filling shallow ground. The faint light at the doorway grows a little clearer. The outlines of familiar things begin to emerge from shadow. A stool, a bucket, a folded cloth, a chest with its worn lid, a bundle of herbs hanging where the smoke can reach them. None of it is fine. None of it is made to impress. But every object has earned its place. Every object belongs. This is how comfort often looks in the older world. Not abundance, not softness everywhere, but usefulness, closeness, and repetition. A home made by hands that understand weather. A room shaped by need, by habit, by returning to the same tasks so often that each one leaves its quiet mark upon the place. At last, you shift beneath the blanket and sit up. The chill finds you at once, brushing your face and hands, but it is an expected thing. It does not shock. It merely reminds. Outside, the season is waiting. The frost is still on the ground. The day will need to be met properly. You gather wool around your shoulders for a moment and let your feet find the floor. Cool earth. Firm. Real. Dull. The embers in the hearth still hold enough life to answer a careful hand. Soon someone will kneel beside them, stir them, feed them, and the room will brighten. For now they remain low and red, giving more reassurance than heat, like a promise that warmth can always be coaxed back if one knows how. You move to the doorway and ease it open just slightly. The cold outside slips in first, thin and clean. Then the village appears. It is still mostly gray, still wrapped in that early softness that makes every roofline gentler, every fence more delicate, every patch of frost seem almost silver. The houses sit quietly beneath their thatch, each one holding its own small world within. A narrow ribbon of smoke rises from one chimney, then another. The lane between the houses is dark with damp and marked by yesterday's passage feet, hooves, wheels, all pressed into the earth and waiting to be crossed again. The sky is pale at its lowest edge, a washed band of light behind the distant trees. Not sunrise yet, only its first intention. You breathe in cold soil, wood smoke, the faint animal warmth from nearby byres, wet straw, dotched off, a trace of something green beneath the frost, hidden but not gone. Somewhere a bird flutters from hedge to branch. A chicken scratches once, twice. Farther away, a dog gives a single half-hearted bark and falls quiet again. No sound is sharp. Everything belongs to the hour, and perhaps that is what makes it so easy to rest here for a while. Nothing is demanding your full attention. Nothing arrives suddenly. The world is only unfolding. You close the door again and return to the hearth. The room feels warmer after the brief touch of outside air. Already someone else has begun to stir. A rustle of cloth, a hand brushing hair back from a sleepy face. The familiar, unspoken understanding of shared mornings. Soon there will be porridge. Soon there will be water to fetch, animals to tend, tools to lift, bread to divide, and all the small, practical motions that hold a household together. But right now those things are still in the near distance. They have not yet fully arrived. This is the gentle threshold between sleeping and doing, and it has its own kind of peace. You dress in layers, known by touch. Linen first, cool and plain. Then wool, carrying yesterday's faint smoke and the clean heaviness of work clothes aired near the hearth. A belt pulled snug, a sleeve straightened, movements repeated so often they ask almost nothing of the mind. That, too, is restful. Not having to decide, only to continue. Outside, the light grows stronger by degrees. The village begins to gather itself. One door opens, then another. A woman passes carrying a pail. A man crosses the lane with his shoulders slightly bent against the cold. A child appears briefly, barefoot and drowsy, then vanishes back inside at the sound of an adult voice. Life here does not begin with spectacle. It begins with accumulation. 100 tiny actions, each one ordinary, together building the day. If you were to walk out now and follow the lane, you would pass things so familiar they might almost disappear from notice, and yet each would carry its own quiet beauty. A stack of wood against a wall, dusted white at the edges. A woven hurdle fence, dark with damp. Footprints leading to a byre and back. A broken cart peg set aside for mending. A clay pot turned upside down beneath the eaves. A doorway curtain lifting faintly with movement behind it. This is not the beauty of rarity. It is the beauty of use, of weather, of things that belong exactly where they are. The people of the village belong in the same way. You know them not as names in a list, but as rhythms in the life around you. The man who always wakes earliest. The woman whose laugh can be heard even in winter. The old neighbor who moves slowly, but sees everything. The children who run ahead of themselves in every season. The household with too many geese. The widow who notices changes in the weather before anyone else says a word. In such a place, no one lives entirely alone. Lives overlap. Sounds carry. Trouble is noticed. So is kindness. If a roof needs patching, someone knows. If a child is ill, someone asks. If an old person has not opened their door by the usual hour, someone pauses in the lane and listens. There are burdens in that closeness, certainly. But there is comfort too. The kind that settles not in grand declarations, but in the quiet certainty that your life is woven into other lives, and theirs into yours. The morning continues to unfold. Birdsong grows a little clearer. The sky lifts from pale gray toward silver blue. The frost still clings to the earth, but less stubbornly now. You know that once the sun rises higher, the white edges will soften, the lane will darken into mud, and the village will move fully into the day it has entered so carefully. There is no rush here. Let the simplicity of it settle around you. The smoke-dark rafters, the low fire coming back to life, the wool against your skin, the narrow lane between familiar homes, the faint sound of neighbors beginning their own mornings, the cold held just outside by timber, thatch, and firelight. This is the sort of world that calms the mind because it asks the mind to stay small, not empty, just close. Close to the body, close to the weather, close to the tasks that can be held in the hand and completed before nightfall. A bowl warm near the hearth, a latch lifted, a loaf cut, a pail filled, a gate secured, a few words exchanged in the lane. In this way, a whole life may feel manageable for an hour or two at a time. And perhaps that is the hidden mercy of ordinary days. They do not require you to think in the scale of kingdoms. They ask only that you keep the fire, feed the people you love, repair what can be repaired, and trust that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough for your knowledge to remain useful. That trust still lives here, still rests in the walls, the lane, the roofs, the fields beyond. Even now, even on a morning that stands, though no one here fully knows it yet, near the edge of a changing world. But that edge is still far from this room, far from this village lane, far from the hush of birds in the hedge and the warmth of the hearth against your knees. So remain here a little longer, in the comfort before the day grows louder, in the softness before attention must widen, in the slow and patient waking of a life that still feels held together by familiar things. Because as the light rises, we'll step out a little farther. We'll move beyond the doorway and into the heart of the village itself, where these small private comforts join into something larger, a shared world, modest and ordinary, and all the more precious because of it. By the time the morning has fully entered the house, the room has changed from a place of sleep into a place of living. The hearth has been coaxed back to life. The low red glow has opened into a steadier flame. The smoke now rises more confidently toward the darkened rafters, taking with it the last softness of night and replacing it with the warmer, busier feeling of the day beginning properly. Your family is awake now, each one moving within the small, familiar circle of the house with the ease of long habit. No one needs much speaking at first. Morning has its own order. One person tends the fire. Another reaches for the wooden bowls. Someone brushes straw from a sleeve. Someone else lifts the lid from a pot and stirs what has been left soaking overnight. The sounds are gentle and close. The small knock of wood on wood. A soft cough. The hush of cloth moving past cloth. A child still not fully awake, shifting nearer the warmth. Nothing here is grand. Nothing would seem impressive to a court or a lordly hall. And yet, if you were asked where safety lies, you might name a room like this before any fortress ever built. It lives in known voices, in the shape of the firelight against the wall, in the fact that your hand can reach in the dimness for a bowl, a belt, a stool, and find each where it ought to be. It lives in the small confidence that this morning will unfold much like others have unfolded before it. Breakfast begins simply. A pot warmed over the fire, grain softened into porridge, perhaps a little milk if there is any to spare, a heel of yesterday's bread warm near the edge of the hearth. Nothing elaborate, yet the smell fills the house with the deep reassurance of continuity. Warm grain, smoke, damp wool drying by the fire, a trace of ash, a trace of honey, if fortune has been kind. One of the children sits close to the hearth, still wrapped in sleep, blinking at the brightening flame. Another had begun to wake more fully, asking some small question about the day ahead, some task half remembered, some curiosity that seemed urgent in dreams and softer by daylight. Their voices are quiet. The room is still mostly given over to the calm work of waking, but the house no longer feels suspended between worlds. It is fully morning now, and fully yours. You eat slowly, not because there is endless time, but because haste has no place at the table when the food is warm and the house still holds the gentleness of early day. The bowl warms your hands. The first mouthful settles something in you. The body, having crossed from sleep into cold, now believes itself ready for the hours ahead. This too is part of safety. Not only walls and fire, but the knowledge of what comes next. Clothing, food, work, voices you know, the lane beyond the door, the village beyond the lane, the fields beyond the village. A whole world, modest in size, but complete in feeling. When the meal is done, the house opens outward. The children are sent to small duties. A pail needs filling. Rushes near the doorway must be shaken out and set right. A bit of kindling is gathered from the dry stack. These are not burdens, only the little tasks by which children slowly learn the texture of life. Not through lessons, but through repetition. Carry this. Fetch that. Mind the gate. Stay where you can be called back. The adults move with the same natural rhythm. Nothing is discussed as though it were important enough to require planning, because most of the day has already been planned by season, place, and necessity. There will be animals to tend, tools to mend, food to prepare, neighbors to greet, work to begin and continue, and bring home again by dusk. In such a life, the shape of the day is not invented fresh each morning. It is received. And because it is received, it carries a kind of peace. When you step outside, the village is no longer half asleep. It hums quietly now, with daily routine. Smoke lifts from the roofs in pale threads. The smell of breakfast drifts from one house, then another, mingling with damp earth, trodden straw, animal warmth, and the bright cold edge of the air. There is a feeling of rootedness here, of belonging so complete it hardly needs to be spoken aloud. The lane is narrow and familiar beneath your feet. Its ruts, puddles, frozen patches, and soft places are known to you as surely as the arrangement of your own house. The houses stand close enough for voices to carry from doorway to doorway, though no one raises theirs unless there is reason. A neighbor nods in greeting. Another pauses to exchange a few words while balancing a bucket against one hip. A child runs past with more energy than the morning seems to deserve, then is called back before getting too far. Nothing in the village is arranged for display, and yet all of it bears the mark of care. A fence patched where weather and use have worn it thin. A roof newly thatched on one side. A broken handle replaced, not matched exactly, but fitted well enough to last. A doorway swept. A stack of wood covered with old cloth against damp. The signs of people who expect to remain. That is what makes this world feel secure. Not wealth, not ease, not the absence of hardship, but permanence. The deep quiet confidence that people have planted themselves here not just for a season, but for generations. Their fathers knew these paths. Their mothers baked in these hearths. Their dead lie not far away beneath the churchyard earth. Everything in the village says, we are from here. And so, perhaps, are you. If you walk toward the center of the settlement, the church stands where it always stands, modest but steady, its presence less theatrical than anchoring. The bell may sound later, but even in silence it organizes the imagination of the place. People live around it not just geographically, but inwardly. Birth, marriage, burial, feast days, fast days, prayers for weather, prayers for health, prayers for the dead, and for the harvest yet to come all these gather there. The church does not dominate the village. It binds it. Near it, the day continues opening. Women carry water. Men lift tools. Older children already imitate adult movement with grave concentration, eager to prove themselves useful. The smallest ones remain at the edge of things, under watchful eyes, half playing and half learning where they belong in the pattern of the day. You know this pattern intimately. You know where the lane bends slightly after rain, where the hens prefer to scratch, which house keeps better ale, which neighbor can be trusted with a borrowed tool, and which one returns it 2 days late with apologies and a smile. You know whose cow is close to calving, whose roof still leaks near the back beam, whose son is old enough now to begin taking on a man's tasks, whose mother has not been well this winter, who always hears news first from the road. In another kind of life, such knowledge might seem small. Here, it is the substance of belonging. This is not merely the place where you sleep. It is the place where your life makes sense. Each part of the village answers another. The forge serves the field. The field serves the household. The household serves the children and the elders. The church watches over all. The lane connects them. The seasons govern them. And every person, however modest their station, fits into the whole in ways both obvious and hidden. That is the deeper comfort of the Saxon world as you know it. Not that life is easy. It is not. Winter bites hard. Harvest can fail. Illness comes without warning. Wood must be cut, grain stored, animals watched, tools repaired, roofs mended, debts remembered. But hardship inside a known order feels different from hardship inside chaos. You can endure much when the world still feels legible. And this world is legible. Its rules are close enough to touch. Its hierarchies are familiar. Its speech is your speech. Its customs are not things you study, but things you inherit through breathing, eating, praying, working, grieving, laughing, and growing older in the same shared place. If the morning is clear enough, as it seems to be today, perhaps you can see beyond the last houses toward the open land where the fields lie waiting. Even now, in winter light, they seem less like property than like memory laid flat across the earth. Ridges and paths worn by repeated use. Boundaries marked not by maps in distant hands, but by long agreement and the patient witness of those who walk them daily. The land is not abstract here. It is specific. This strip, that edge, this patch that drains badly after rain, that corner where the grain stands best in a good year. The names of these places are known not because they are written down, but because they are said, again and again, by people whose lives depend on them. That too is safety. To know where you are standing, and to feel that the ground knows you back. Perhaps you continue now toward your work, or perhaps you pause first to take in the life of the village more fully. Either way, there is a quiet satisfaction in the sight of ordinary people engaged in ordinary necessity. A woman shaking out cloth in the pale light. A man checking an ox's hoof. An older child carrying wood with exaggerated seriousness. Two neighbors exchanging a word at a gate, each knowing roughly how the other has weathered the season so far. These are not remarkable scenes, but they are exactly the scenes that become precious once threatened. For now, though, no threat has yet entered the lane in visible form. The village remains itself, warm in its own way, even in cold weather, held together by routine, by memory, by the nearness of one life to another. There is comfort, too, in the things that repeat beyond the household. The same churchyard path, the same well, the same workshop smoke, the same broad gestures of season and labor. At times, the world may seem no larger than this, and perhaps that is part of why it feels secure. The distant affairs of nobles and kings rise and fall somewhere beyond the horizon. But here the day still asks simpler things. Keep the fire. Mind the animals. Repair what is broken. Share what news is worth sharing. Come home before dark. And perhaps that is why a rumor, when it comes, sounds at first so strange. Not because rumor itself is unusual. Travelers pass, news wanders, stories grow as they move. But because even the smallest unsettling thing stands out sharply against such a stable background. It begins, perhaps, with a mention at the well. A traveler has seen something unusual in the sky, or a merchant passing through spoke of it in another village farther south. A bright shape, a strange light, a tail burning across the heavens. Not a star, not as stars should be, not a thing anyone can easily account for. By itself, this would be only a curiosity, a winter or spring wonder to be discussed for a day or two, then folded into memory. But people do not speak of such things casually, not in a world where sky and season and divine will still feel closely woven together. A strange sign above the earth is rarely left meaningless. So the rumor settles lightly at first, then more heavily. Old people remember other signs and what followed them. Children ask to hear the story again. Someone laughs it off. Someone else makes the sign of the cross. Someone says it was seen clearly after sunset, bright enough to stop a man on the road. Another insists it hung there night after night, as though the heavens themselves were unwilling to look away. You may not know what to make of it. Most people do not. And perhaps that is exactly why it lingers. Not as fear, not yet, but as a tremor beneath ordinary thought. Even in this peaceful world, change is afoot. Rumors begin to swirl of comets in the sky, of strange signs, of unrest felt first as whisper rather than fact. No one in the village can yet say what any of it means. But people begin, in their own quiet ways, to notice that the air around the old certainty has altered slightly. Not broken, only thinned. And still the village goes on. Breakfast fires burn down into the day's work. Buckets are filled, animals fed, doors opened and shut. The lane carries footsteps as it always has. Children are called back from puddles and puddles ignored by those old enough not to care. A tool breaks and must be mended. Someone shares a crust with someone else. The church stands. The fields wait. The smoke rises. This is important, perhaps more important than anything else at this stage of the story. The world does not collapse all at once. It remains itself while the first signs of change drift at its edges. And because it remains itself, because it still feels warm and known and deeply inhabited, we can understand what there is to lose. So let us stay here a little longer. In the warmth of these early moments, in the village, before history arrives in full, there is no hurry. The world will come to us. By now the village is fully awake, and your own path through it is as familiar as the grain in the wood of your doorway. You live as a blacksmith here, and long before many others have settled properly into the day, your work is already waiting for you. The forge stands a short walk from your house, near enough that you can cross to it in only a few moments, but separate enough that its heat, smoke, and noise belong to a world of their own. As you step toward it, the cold morning air still bites lightly at your face, but you know it will not follow you inside for long. The forge has its own weather, its own season, its own light. When you push past the open front and into the shadowed warmth, the familiar smell meets you first. Iron, dot, charcoal, ash, old smoke caught in timber and stone, the faint mineral scent of quenched metal. To anyone else, perhaps, it would seem harsh. To you, it smells like usefulness, like labor made visible, like the part of the village where rough things are given shape and purpose. You begin, as you always begin, not with haste, but with order. The hearth of the forge must be coaxed properly, fuel arranged, air fed carefully, tools checked by touch and sight. Hammer, tongs, punches, chisel, files, bucket, bellows, each in its place, each carrying the memory of 1,000 other mornings. Soon the fire wakes, its glow deepens, its breath changes. The first real heat pushes outward into the room and settles onto your hands and face. Then comes the first sound of the day that truly belongs to your craft. The ringing strike of hammer on metal. Sharp at first, then steady, then almost soothing once it settles into rhythm. The clang of your hammer carries beyond the forge and into the village air. Not loudly, enough to command attention, but clearly enough that others notice it as part of the day's proper beginning. Like the church bell, like a gate latch, like the bark of a dog near the lane. Your work has become one of the sounds by which the village knows itself. There is comfort in that. People depend on what you make, though few would say it grandly. A plowshare worn thin from the last season's breaking of ground. A hinge bent from damp and use. A knife needing a better edge. Nails for a fence, a lock, a cart fitting, an iron band for a wheel. Sometimes a small domestic thing. Sometimes something heavier and more serious. Most often, simply the countless quiet repairs that keep a community from slowly wearing apart. You are not only a man who strikes metal, you are one of the many ways the village continues being itself. By the time the first customer or neighbor appears, the heat has already settled deep into the room. Your sleeves are pushed back slightly. The skin of your hands has warmed. The iron changes color under your eye, with the certainty of an old language you no longer need to translate in words. Red Deutsch, brighter red, orange. The precise moment to lift it. The precise moment to strike. A man comes in carrying a broken iron fitting from his cart. He does not need to explain much. You know the strain of village roads, the drag of weight through winter ground, the slow damage that carts endure even in good weather. You take the piece from him, turn it once in your hand and nod. He waits while you work, making brief talk of the day, the cold, the field paths, the look of the sky. Nothing important. And yet, in a village like this, such exchanges are a kind of thread. The world is held together partly by wood and iron, partly by repeated speech. Then another comes, and another. A woman asking if the small knife her household uses can be sharpened before the next market day. A farmer with a tool handle to be refitted. A young boy sent by his father with an item wrapped in cloth and careful instructions not to drop it. You know the households they come from. You know what kind of winter each has had, roughly what stores they keep, who in their family is old, young, ill, newly married, newly buried. Not because you pry, because lives here overlap. The forge, for all its heat and labor, is also a listening place. People bring metal, but they bring words as well. Small complaints, small jokes, fragments of village knowledge. Who is mending a roof before the next rain? Whose daughter has been promised in marriage? Whose cow finally calved in the night? What road has gone soft with mud? Which traveler passed through 3 days ago with a strange accent and stranger news? In this way, your work puts you close to the pulse of the place. Not above it, just near it. You hear the village thinking aloud, without ever intending to. And all around you, the shape of Saxon life continues in its familiar order. Fields and common land, households and kin, the church and its calendar. Season after season, structuring human effort. Customs inherited more than explained. People knowing where they stand not through written rules pinned up for all to see, but through memory, obligation, expectation, and the long practice of living among one another. A place like this is not simple because people are simple. It is simple because life has been worn into patterns strong enough to hold. The farmer belongs to the field, but not only to the field. He belongs to his household, to the lane, to the common labor of harvest, to feast days, to mourning, to church, to the watchful knowledge of his neighbors. The women of the village manage stores, spinning, bread, children, cloth, herbs, poultry, sickness, weather, and the 1,000 invisible acts without which no household survives. Children carry the first lessons of belonging in their hands. Fetch, hold, watch, help, listen, remember. Elders, though sometimes slower in step, carry authority of another kind. They remember where water rises after hard rain, which family line once held, which bit of land, what was done the last time sickness moved through the village, what the signs in the sky were said to mean in some older year when trouble came afterward. Nothing stands alone. And because nothing stands alone, everything feels deeper rooted. Even the land is not merely background. It is part of the social body itself. The fields beyond the village are not just places where food comes from. They are places of memory, labor, and repeated return. Their ridges carry the marks of years of work. Their boundaries live in the mind and on the tongue. One strip drains better, another catches the wind. One patch gives good barley, another is stubborn, always needing more from the plow, and never giving enough back in gratitude. To outsiders, land may seem like possession. To those who live within it, it is also companionship. The forge opens onto this wider world in another way too. You do not only make things for daily peace. You sometimes mend the traces of conflict left over from other seasons, other obligations, other loyalties. An old spear point, a rusted mail ring, a heavy blade, not much used by ordinary villagers, but still kept because memory in England is never free of old wars. The land has known raiders before, kings before, oaths before, trouble before. Perhaps that is why recent talk does not feel entirely unreal, only unwelcome. At first it comes in scraps. A man at the forge repeats what he heard from someone who came from the road south. The old king is dead, he says. Or perhaps he says it quietly, as though speaking too plainly of royal death might somehow make it nearer. Another man claims the great men of the kingdom are already disputing what comes next. Someone else shrugs and says such matters are for earls and bishops, not for people with fields to tend and tools to mend. And for a while, that seems true enough. The death of a king belongs to a distant world. It happens in halls few villagers will ever see. Its meaning travels slowly, thinning as it goes. You may know the name. You may know the church will mark the passing. You may know people will speak of succession and rightful claim, and God's will. But still the forge must be lit. The animals must be fed. A roof beam does not care who sits the throne. A pothook breaks exactly when it breaks. Life continues with a stubbornness that is almost holy. Yet the rumor does not vanish. It gathers companions. Someone speaks again of the strange sign in the sky. A bright, wandering object with a tail like fire, seen by many, denied by none who have long enough. A few call it a wonder. More call it an omen. The old do not laugh when such things are mentioned. They fall quiet. In the forge, between one strike and the next, you hear an older man say he has lived long enough to know the heavens rarely trouble themselves without reason. Another replies that people always look backward after disaster and suddenly find signs everywhere. A third says little, but makes the sign of the cross before changing the subject. The conversations move this way now, half practical, half uneasy, as though ordinary life remains in command of the hands, but the mind has begun to glance now and then toward the horizon. None of this has changed the village yet. That is the strange thing. The lane is still the lane. The church still stands. Children still chase one another too close to puddles. Women still shake out cloth and coal from doorways. Men still carry tools over their shoulders and discuss weather with grave seriousness. The smell of porridge, bread, damp wool, and smoke still drifts through the morning air. But beneath the visible sameness, something has begun to vibrate. A low tension. Not panic. Not even fear. Only the subtle discomfort of not knowing whether distant events will remain distant. And so you listen more carefully than before. Travelers matter more in such times. A passing rider. A merchant with a pack horse. A man from another village come to collect a repaired tool, and staying just long enough for ale and a few words. Each brings not certainty, but fragments. A claim here, contradiction there, a report of ships, a report of oaths, a report that one noble supports one man, another supports someone else. There are names now. names repeated until even those who care little for politics begin to retain them. Harold, William, Dot, perhaps another, spoken with less confidence. The exact details remain muddy in the mouths of ordinary people, but the shape of the matter grows clearer. The kingdom is unsettled. Men of rank are making claims, and claims, if pressed hard enough, always seem to end in demands placed on lesser lives. For you, the unease remains mostly in thought, not in action. The forge still needs you. In fact, it may need you more than ever. When a world feels less steady, people begin checking their tools more carefully, repairing what they might otherwise postpone, keeping useful things close. A sharpened blade feels different in the hand when rumor has begun to harden into possibility. You notice it in the work brought to you. Not only domestic things now, but heavier items, iron heads, a stronger fastening for a shield rim long stored, an old spear straightened, a length of chain inspected and mended. No one speaks too dramatically about why. They say only that it is good to be prepared, that there is no harm in having such things ready, that kings may quarrel far away, but wise people keep their own house in order. Perhaps that is true. Or perhaps this is how fear enters village life, not with a cry, but with caution disguised as prudence. At midday, when the first part of your work slows and the heat of the forge has settled into your bones, you step outside for a moment and let the colder air meet your skin again. The contrast is almost shocking now, the village seeming pale and quiet after the red heart of the forge. A child runs past carrying bread wrapped in cloth. A woman bends to lift water from a bucket to a smaller vessel. Two men stand near the lane, discussing something in low tones, glancing once toward the road as though expecting it to answer them. Above them all, the sky is calm. Blue, perhaps, or veiled with thin cloud. Harmless, at first glance. And yet it is precisely the sky that people have begun to distrust. The comet, if comet it is, has become more than a sighting. It has become a vessel into which everyone pours their own uncertainty. For some it means judgment. For others, war. For others, merely change. But no one who speaks of it does so as though nothing at all will follow. You think of this while eating your midday food with slow, practical hunger. Bread. Cheese, if there is cheese. Something simple, carried from home. The forge behind you. The village around you. The world as it has always been, and perhaps as it will not always remain. Still, the body demands what it demands. You eat. You drink. You wipe your hands. You return to work. There is almost a mercy in labor during uncertain time. Hands know what to do even when the mind circles uselessly around distant events. Metal does not care for rumor. It cares for heat, timing, force, patience. The task in front of you remains honest, measurable, immediate. And yet, the day continues bringing tidings. By late afternoon, the story has sharpened enough to disturb even those who prefer not to think beyond the village. Word comes that Harold faces trouble from one quarter, while William waits from another. A threat from the north. An armed ambition across the sea. Pinged and pulled toward danger by more than one hand at once. The details arrive broken, as all early news does. Some say the danger is already landed. Some say it is only gathering. Some say the new king will settle it quickly. Some say no man, however strong, can answer two storms at once. The winds of war blow south as King Harold faces a new threat. And across the seas, Duke William waits. You do not need to know every courtly detail to understand the shape of that sentence. If men gather for war, villages will feel it. If ships cross the sea, fields will feel it. If kings contend, someone will have to carry, forge, feed, march, repair, bury, rebuild. The distance between great events and ordinary people is never as great as it first appears. Still, this has not yet happened here. That matters. The lane is still intact. The houses still smoke gently into evening. The church still gathers the fading light on its wall. The children still return home hungry from play and chores. The animals still need shutting in. The forge still dims from white to orange to red as the day's work nears its end. And perhaps because everything visible remains so ordinary, the suspense grows sharper, not softer. How long can a village remain untouched when the kingdom beyond it has begun to shift? How much warning does ordinary life ever truly receive? At what point does rumor stop being rumor and start being history pressing its thumb against the door? You bank the fire toward evening, easing it down rather than killing it outright. The last jobs are set aside. Tomorrow's tasks are already beginning to suggest themselves. Metal cools on the bench. Tools are returned to their places. The forge settles with little clicks and sighs, as if even it grows tired after holding so much heat. When you step back into the lane, the day has softened again. Smoke hangs lower now. Voices have changed in quality, less brisk, more domestic. The village draws inward at dusk, as villages do. What was public in morning becomes household once more by evening. At home, there will be food, fire, familiar faces, the close protection of walls against the growing dark. There will be the comfort of routine repeated once more. And beneath that comfort, perhaps, the quieter knowledge that something beyond the fields is drawing nearer, though no one can yet say how near or in what form. But life in the village continues, unaware of the storm that's slowly brewing. And for now, that unawareness is its own kind of mercy. The next few days pass in a blur, though not the kind of blur made by panic. It is the blur of repetition, the kind that comes when one day lays itself gently over the next until time feels less like a line and more like woven cloth. The forge wakes, the lane fills, the hearths are fed, the same doors open, the same animals complain at the same hour, the same boots gather the same mud. And yet, beneath all of it, there is a difference now, slight but undeniable, like a note out of tune so faintly sounded that only the patient ear catches it. You feel it most in the pauses, in the moments between one hammer strike and the next, in the extra breath someone takes before passing on a bit of news, in the way a conversation about weather lingers half a heartbeat too long before turning, as conversations now often do, toward matters no one in the village can fully see and no one can quite ignore. The work continues, of course. It must. A village cannot stop itself simply because the wider world has grown uncertain. Axes still loosen in their sockets, knives still dull, hinges still warp. The plow, the cart, the pot-hook, the latch, the iron band for the wheel, all of them still ask for attention, and your hands still know how to answer. So you work. You draw the bellows. You watch the color rise in the metal. You lift, turn, strike, cool, inspect, begin again. The rhythm remains almost comforting, and sometimes that comfort is enough to make the rest of the world feel far away for a little while. Then, someone says a name, or mentions the sky, or lowers their voice near the doorway, and the distance closes again. The village has not changed in any visible way that an outsider would notice. If a stranger rode through at midday, he might see only a healthy place in the old pattern of English life. Smoke over the roofs, children near the lane, women at household tasks, men crossing from field to byre to workshop and back again, a church keeping its place at the center, a forge ringing steadily into the cold or damp air. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken, but those who belong here can feel that belonging itself becoming more precious. The smell of breakfast drifting from the houses in the morning, the wet earth of the lane after frost gives way, the low talk between neighbors who need not explain themselves in full, the warmth of fire at dusk after a day of weather and labor. These things have begun to gather weight, not because they are changing yet, but because some instinct deep within you has started to understand that they might. You do not say that aloud. Most people do not. There is no use in naming a shadow before it has taken shape. Still, it lives somewhere in the body now, this sense that the village is standing at the edge of something larger than itself. The comet is spoken of less often than before, but with more seriousness. That is how such things settle into a place. First they are repeated with excitement. Later, they are remembered with caution. Now no one needs to describe it in detail. A person need only say, "that sign in the sky," and everyone knows what is meant. Some dismiss it still. A few insist that heaven is heaven, and men on earth see warnings only when they are already frightened. Others say no, such signs come for a reason, and it is foolish to pretend otherwise. But even among those who laugh, the laughter is lighter now, less certain. The world has become a little easier to read as omen. In the evenings, when work is done, and the lanes darken, and the village folds inward around its fires, the talk sometimes turns more openly. Not loudly, never for long, but enough. Someone heard from a traveler that great men are gathering forces. Someone else says the new king has moved quickly, as a strong king must. Another says strength matters little when enemies rise from more than one direction. A fourth warns against trusting every story carried on the road. People nod at that, yet no one fully returns to easier subjects. It is not fear that has settled here, not yet. It is anticipation, a low inward leaning of the mind toward events not yet arrived. The same feeling one has before a storm reaches the village from beyond the hills. The sky may still be pale. The roof may still be dry. Dickens may still scratch where they always scratch. And yet the air itself has changed. Something is making its way toward you. Whether slowly or swiftly, you cannot tell. The days continue. That is what makes this moment so strange and so human. Even with uncertainty spreading through the kingdom, porridge still needs stirring. Children still need calling back from puddles and ditches. Wood still needs cutting. Animals still need fodder. A household still rises and eats and works, and returns to itself by evening. And in some ways, ordinary life becomes even more soothing under such conditions. You notice it when you enter your house at dusk and feel the warmth meet you. When the smell of grain and smoke settles around you. When familiar hands set down familiar bowls. When voices you know fill the room in their usual order. Those moments do not erase uncertainty, but they soften it. They return you, briefly, to a smaller and more manageable world. This is the hidden strength of routine. It gives shape to a day that might otherwise begin to dissolve into thought. And so the village keeps turning on its old axis, even as rumor circles around it like weather. At the forge, the work brought to you has begun to shift again, though subtly. More repairs to tools that have long sat unused. More requests for sturdier fittings. An old blade taken down from rafters and brought in for sharpening, its owner speaking casually. Too casually, about wanting it serviceable just in case. A shield rim needing attention. A spear. Point straightened. Not many. Not enough to call it a pattern outright, but enough to notice. Men who once would have spoken only of crops and drainage now ask, almost as an afterthought, how quickly iron can be worked if more is needed. How long a haft should last if kept dry. Whether rust can be trusted not to weaken a blade in earnest use. They speak as if merely curious. You answer as if merely practical. Neither side says what sits underneath the exchange. But you know, deep down, change is coming. Something new will arrive. Something foreign. Not only in the sense of men from elsewhere, though perhaps that too, but foreign in the deeper sense. A way of life not yet felt directly, but already casting a different shadow. There are moments when the village seems to sense it all at once. A rider appears unexpectedly on the road, and every head turns. A shout from the lane carries farther than it should. The church bell sounds, and for one foolish instant, the heart mistakes it for alarm. Then the moment passes, and everyone returns to what they were doing, a little embarrassed by the speed of their own attention. This is how tension lives before it becomes event. Not in constant dread, but in these small surges and recoveries. Attention, tightening, then loosening, then tightening again. The weather itself seems to take on meaning now. A strange wind. A sky too red at dusk. a morning mist slow to lift. These things have always happened, of course, but in unsettled times the mind receives them differently. The world begins to feel full of messages, though no one can say who sent them. Then, the news sharpens. Word reaches the village, not by trumpet or proclamation, but by the old methods travelers, messengers, fragments repeated from mouth to mouth until they arrive worn but recognizable. Harold has marched north. The Norwegians are in the field. There will be fighting. The news moves through the village in a particular way, not with open shock, because war between claimants and kings belongs, in theory, to another level of life, but with the sober quiet that follows confirmation of what was feared in outline. So it is true then. The kingdom is not merely uneasy. It is in motion. People say the name of the Norwegian king in different ways, some confidently, some not at all. It does not matter. What matters is the shape of the thing. A threat from the north is no rumor now. It has become a march, an army, a destination on the road. And with that truth comes another, half-spoken and half-imagined. If one enemy rises in one direction, who can say what waits in another? News of Harold's march north to face the Norwegians reaches the village. But rumors swirl that something even bigger awaits. Across the sea, they say, the Norman Duke watches, waits, measures the moment. Some say he has ships ready. Some say he has men enough to darken a shore. Some say he claims the crown for himself with the cold confidence of a man who has already begun imagining where others will kneel. And yet these things are still only stories to the village, even when they are believed. No Norman has ridden your lane. No foreign banner has appeared beyond the field. The church still stands exactly where it stood yesterday. The forge still glows. The children still laugh when not being watched too closely. This is why the tension deepens instead of breaking, because nothing here has yet answered the scale of what is being spoken of. The ordinary world continues, and continues persuasively. It keeps saying, perhaps the storm will pass elsewhere. Perhaps it will shrink as all road news shrinks. Perhaps kings will settle what kings begin, and villages will remain villages. A part of you would like to believe that. Perhaps most of you would, and so you continue your daily work. There is iron to heat, a wheel band to fit, a hook to bend, a broken blade to examine, a young boy watching too closely and being gently sent to stand farther back from the sparks, a neighbor pausing in the doorway not because he needs anything urgent, but because he wants to know whether you have heard the latest and whether it sounds, to your ear, more serious than before. This is what suspense looks like in an ordinary place. Not dramatic music. Not people frozen in terror. Only labor continuing under a sky that has begun to feel slightly less innocent. At home, the same pattern repeats in gentler form. Meals are shared. The children are guided through their small responsibilities. Evening firelight softens the walls. Someone mentions what was heard during the day. Someone else says nothing and keeps stirring the pot. No one wants to carry worry too heavily into the room where food is eaten and sleep begin. That too is a kind of wisdom. A quiet return to safety after each small drain of energy. The wider world may be tilting, but the bowl is still warm in your hands. The roof still holds. The fire still answers when fed. Those truths matter. And perhaps because they matter, they begin to feel fragile. You notice the children more. The way they move through the house as though it will always be there. The way they trust the future without effort. You notice the lane at dusk, the smoke, the church wall catching the last week light. You notice the sound of geese, the shape of a bucket by the door, the place where tools hang, the rough patch in the table grain where a knife once slipped years ago. Nothing has been lost. And yet your mind has begun quietly to register these things as if preparing to remember them. The village itself does not know this. Or if it knows only in the old instinctive way communities know danger before they speak of it plainly. A tightening, a watchfulness, a deeper gratitude for ordinary evenings. For now, though, life continues. The next morning comes, then another. The forge sounds out into the lane. Breakfast smells rise from the houses. The roads remain roads, not battle lines. The fields remain fields, not marching ground. Everything holds its shape. But somewhere beyond the boundaries of what you can see, men are moving. Ships are being watched. Oaths are hardening into action. The kingdom is gathering itself toward impact. And a part of you wonders, though you do not say it often, and perhaps not even aloud to yourself, will you be called to serve? Not today, perhaps. Perhaps not tomorrow. For now, your place is still here, where iron meets fire, and the village continues to trust in the old shape of things. But the question has entered the room, all the same. It waits quietly at the edge of thought, like a guest no one invited and no one knows how to dismiss. For now, though, you continue your daily work. The hammer rises. The hammer falls. The sparks lift and vanish. And all around you, the village carries on beneath a sky that has not yet chosen what it will become. The news does not arrive all at once. It comes in waves, and each wave seems to pull the village a little farther from the easy shape of ordinary time. One day, there is only rumor. The next, there is direction. Then names. Then numbers no one can verify. Then certainty in one place and uncertainty in another. And through it all, the forge still burns, the hearth still answers, and the village keeps trying to move as though the old pattern has not already begun to fray. At first, the threat remains divided in the mind. One danger in the north, another waiting somewhere beyond the sea. These are too large to picture clearly, and so people keep translating them into smaller terms they can hold. A king marching, an army gathering, a road filling with men, a village somewhere else sending its able-bodied sons, a messenger riding hard enough to foam his horse, a noble household calling in stores before winter. These things can be imagined. These things can be repeated by the fire and understood. The kingdom, they say, is being tested from more than one direction, and the new king, Harold, moves as a man must move when delay itself becomes dangerous. The Norwegians have come. That much is no longer doubted. They have crossed the water, landed, advanced, and somewhere far to the north, the old, hard question of rule is now being answered by men in armor, rather than by priests or promises. To most in your village, the north is close enough to matter and far enough to remain unreal. The names of places come spoken through several mouths before reaching your. Each mouth alters something. A river becomes a marsh. A road becomes a ford. A skirmish becomes a slaughter. Then a slaughter becomes a victory. Then a victory becomes uncertain again. Truth travels slowly when carried by frightened people and hopeful ones alike. Still, the effect is the same. The village has begun to lean inward and outward at once. Inward, toward its routines, its walls, its warm bowls, its evening fires. Outward, toward the road, the lane, the sky, any passing rider, any stranger with news. At the forge, this double movement settles into the world. Men arrive with practical requests and stay to ask impractical questions. How strong is Harold's household guard? How far can a king march in one stretch if the roads hold? Do the Norwegians mean to stay? Will the fight end before frost hardens the fields? Will the south remain quiet while the north burns? You cannot answer such things. No one in the village truly can. And yet the questions themselves become part of the day, appearing between tasks like sparks that rise and vanish, never quite setting the world ablaze, but never fully disappearing either. The old blade brought for sharpening yesterday is joined by another today. An axe haft is replaced with greater care than usual. A spear point, long neglected, is cleaned and straightened. A man asks you to mend the iron boss of a shield his father once used, and his sons have never needed. He says he only wants it sound. Again, nothing more. No reason to let good things go to waste. You nod. Neither of you says the larger truth aloud. The village is preparing, but in the manner of people who do not yet wish to admit they are preparing. That is how tension loops through these days. Work, bite, rumor, dot, meal, watchfulness, work again. One morning the lane feels almost normal. By evening some new fragment of war has passed from house to house and settled over the thatch like a second weather. Then dawn comes, and with dawn porridge, buckets, tools, children, smoke, and all the small acts by which life reasserts itself. This return to the ordinary does not erase fear. It only folds fear into a gentler shape. And perhaps that is why people endure it as well as they do. No one can remain fully alarmed from sunrise to sleep. The body refuses. The hand still reaches for wood, for wool, for bread, for the latch, for the bowl. The mind still seeks rest in the known path between house and lane, and field and fire. You begin to notice how often conversations now start in one place and end in another. A man comes to talk about plow fittings and leaves asking if you think men from this district will be called. A woman waiting for a sharpened knife mentions that her sister's husband saw armed riders 3 days ago and could not tell whose banner they serve. A boy sent for nails lingers to hear whether the king truly marched with astonishing speed, or whether such stories grow taller with every retelling. Harold, they say, is moving north fast enough to astonish even those who do not love him. He means to strike before the invaders can fully root themselves. That idea carries through the village like warmth. Speed feels like strength. Strength feels like hope. If the king is swift, perhaps the kingdom will hold. If the kingdom holds, perhaps villages like yours may never feel the edge of this war except as rumor and prayer. So hope enters, though carefully. It sits at the table, but does not take the best place. People begin allowing themselves small sentences. Perhaps he will drive them back into the sea. Perhaps this northern threat will break quickly. Perhaps, after all, the signs in the sky meant less than frightened minds imagine. You hear such talk while working the bellows, while trimming a repair piece, while turning hot metal on the anvil. And because hope is as contagious as fear, the forge feels lighter for an afternoon or two. The work remains the same, but shoulders sit differently. Voices rise a little. A few jokes return. The world, for a brief moment, seems capable of restoring itself. Then another rider passes through. Then another story comes down the road. Then everything tightens again. For though Harold has gone north, William still waits across the water. That name now lands more heavily than before. William. Not only a claimant, not only a foreign duke with ambition, but a possibility growing sharper every day. The king is absent from the south. Some say he has gathered ships. Some say favorable winds are all he lacks. Some say he has promised much to the men who will follow him. Land, one, all. Titles, English wealth imagined from across the sea like fruit hanging low for the taking. No one in the village knows precisely what is true. But the pattern is enough. A kingdom can withstand one emergency better than two. And even those who know little of courtly matters understand that absence creates openings. This becomes the new loop. Hope for the north, fear for the south, relief that the king is acting, unease that he must act far from where another danger watches. The mind circles these points as a tongue circles a broken tooth, again and again, never solving, never ignoring. At home the same circling lives in softer form. Evening comes. The firelight steadies. Bowls are filled. The children grow sleepy in the warmth after the day's movement. Someone asks what was heard. Someone answers only part of it. No household willingly invites all of war inside at once. So the room does what rooms like this have always done. It absorbs worry and thins it. A hand brushes hair back from a child's forehead. Someone tears bread. A stool is moved closer to the fire. The smell of cooked grain and smoke and wool settles around everyone. The roof still holds. The walls still hold. The people inside them still belong to one another. Return to that. Always return to that. Because the wider world is now moving faster than the village can understand, and without these returns, the mind would tire itself raw. This, perhaps, is the hidden rhythm of living near war, before war arrives. The repeated making of small islands of safety. A meal, a repaired tool, a mended sleeve, a child asleep by the fire, the known path to the well in morning light. These are not grand defenses, but they are defenses all the same. Then, at last, the northern news sharpens into something unmistakable. Harold has met the Norwegians. There has been battle, a real one. Not a raid, not a skirmish magnified by frightened tongues, but a battle large enough that the land itself will remember it. The place name reaches you in altered forms from different mouths, but the meaning arrives whole. The king has fought. And then, with almost unbelievable suddenness, hope surges. He won. The Norwegian threat, they say, has been broken. Their great king has fallen. Men who marched in one confidence now lie in another country's earth. The danger from the north has been met and answered. England, for one precious moment, seems to have escaped disaster by strength and speed and sheer force of will. The village receives this news like thirsty ground receiving rain. Relief opens people visibly. Voices rise. Shoulders drop. Ta. Someone laughs in disbelief. Someone crosses himself in gratitude. Someone says the king has proven himself beyond all doubt. Someone else, more cautious, says let us not celebrate until more certainty comes, but even he cannot keep warmth from entering his tone. For a night or two the village rests easier. Not fully, never fully now, but enough to remember how lightness feels. At the forge, the work continues under this brief lift in mood. The hammer sounds cleaner. The men who come through the doorway stand longer in the warmth and talk less darkly. One says perhaps William, hearing of this defeat in the north, will think better of his claim. Another says perhaps he never meant to come at all, that men across the sea always threaten more than they act. A third says the heavens may yet favor England. You do not know whether to believe any of it. Still, even doubt becomes more bearable when hope has room beside it. Then, the next wave comes. And it comes fast. Just as the north has been won, the south is broken open. William has landed. Not merely prepared, not merely watched, not merely threatened. Landed. With men, horses, intent. The sea has given him passage, and now the long-feared second storm is no longer beyond the water. It is in England. The effect of this news is different from what came before. It does not spread as argument. It spreads as weight. The king, exhausted from the northern march and battle, must now turn and march south. The men who fought must gather themselves again. The kingdom, which had just exhaled, must immediately learn to breathe under strain once more. Relief curdles into frustration so swiftly, it almost feels like betrayal. Could there be no clean victory? No settled ending? Must every answered threat open the door to another? This becomes the deepest loop yet. Hope, mashit. Then, interruption. Relief. Then, dread. The human heart can endure this, but not without cost. You feel it in your own body. In the extra tightness across the shoulders while working. In the way silence now falls between people more suddenly, as if everyone is listening for something beyond hearing. In the way food tastes both necessary and slightly far away when eaten under the press of fresh news. The work brought to your forge shifts again. Now the requests come with fewer disguises. A knife sharpened well and quickly. Arrowheads. A few at first, then more. Mail links inspected. A buckle repaired on a war belt. A shield handle reinforced. No one says this is war work if they can help it. But no one mistakes it for household maintenance either. You understand now that your craft stands nearer the edge of events than before. You may not be on the road with the king. You may not stand beneath banners or hear commands shouted across a field, but the coming struggle is already passing through your hands in iron form. Each piece you mend or shape belongs to the widening circle of conflict. Men speak more quietly now. A summons may come, someone says. Free men may be required. Local lords may call for service. Or perhaps craftsmen will be needed more here than in the field. No one knows. Every possibility seems plausible because certainty itself has thinned. At home, the room grows more precious with each passing night. The children do not understand everything, but they understand enough to notice the changed quality in adult voices. They look up more often when the latch lifts. They pause in play when certain names are spoken. They sense, in the old wordless way children do, that the world beyond the fire has shifted, and that the people they trust are measuring it carefully. So you return them, as much as you can, to safety. Another piece of bread, a hand on a shoulder, a task small enough to complete, a story half told before sleep, the ordinary restored in fragments. This repetition matters, because a household cannot live at battle pitch. It must come down, again and again, to manageable things. The spoon, the bowl, the blanket, the embers banked for morning. The child carried half asleep to a pallet. The quiet words at the end of the day. Outside, though, the kingdom is no longer manageable in that way. Now the names begin to gather around one place, Hastings, or something near it. A hill, a road, a stretch of war. Southern ground where the king and the duke must surely meet, if neither yields. No one in your village sees this place. No one can picture it clearly. And yet it begins to occupy the imagination like a shape emerging through fog. You hear of marching, of haste, of the need to meet the invader before he can root himself too deeply. You hear that Harold will not wait, that he means to strike as he struck in the north. That speed remains his strength. That courage remains with him. That perhaps this too can be answered. The word perhaps becomes very large in such days. People cling to it because the alternative is too bare to hold for long. Perhaps the king's housecarls are enough. Perhaps the shield wall will hold. Perhaps Norman horses will fail against English ground. Perhaps this second battle will end as the first one did, with danger broken and the kingdom spared. These hopes move through the village even as darker thoughts move beneath them. The army is tired, some say. The march is long. The men have already fought. The south is not the north. A second battle may demand more than valor. Still, no one wants to live entirely on the dark side of possibility. So hope remains, thin but real. At the forge, you find yourself working later now. Not by command, but by pressure. Too many things require mending. Too many men want readiness. Too many hours are spent listening for tidings, while pretending to care only about the temper of metal. The fire reddens the walls deep into evening. Your hands ache. The hammer's rhythm, once soothing, now carries a pulse of urgency beneath it. Still you work. What else is there to do? And between one task and the next, the mind wanders south. To roads you have not seen. To men you do not know. To a battlefield not yet fought and already present in every thought. Hastings is on the horizon, though not yet a name for all who speak of it. A battle is coming. A deciding one, people begin to feel, though they do not always say so plainly. Not because one fight can solve all things forever, but because the kingdom cannot bear this stretch of uncertainty for long. Something must break. Something must settle. Something must be decided in blood where words and promises have failed. That knowledge presses against the village without entering it. The lane remains the lane. The church remains standing. The forge remains hot. The smoke rises. Children sleep. Morning still comes. And yet, all these ordinary truths now exist under a gathering shadow cast from far away. You brace yourself. Not dramatically. Not with speeches or vows. only inwardly. In the quiet way ordinary people do when they sense that their lives may soon be touched by forces too large to stop. But even in the face of war, there is still time to prepare. Perhaps all is not lost. That thought is what the village lives on now. Not certainty, not peace. Only the narrow, necessary hope that preparation may matter, that the king may still prevail, that the storm gathering beyond sight may yet break elsewhere, or break less terribly than fear. So the loop continues. Work, law, rumor, day, firelight, hope, fear, rest, then dawn again. And somewhere to the south, the kingdom moves toward its reckoning. Life in the village carries on, as you try to maintain some semblance of normalcy in the midst of growing chaos. That, perhaps, is the most human thing of all. Not that danger vanishes, not that uncertainty loosens its grip, but that people still rise in the morning and tend the fire. They still cut bread. They still fetch water. They still shake sleep from blankets, fasten belts, sweep brushes, lift pails, mend hinges, quiet children, and step into the day as though the world has not already begun to tilt. And maybe that is not denial. Maybe it is wisdom, because no one can live for long in the full glare of fear. The mind needs corners to rest in. The body needs motions it can complete. The heart needs proof, however small, that not everything has changed at once. So, the village returns, again and again, to itself. Morning still comes through the same cracks in the wall. The same lane darkens with damp under the first feet of the day. The same birds fuss in the hedge, and the same smoke lifts in pale threads above the roofs. At the well, people still gather with buckets and brief words. At the church, prayers still rise in the old language of need and hope. At the forge, the fire still answers when fed. Everywhere, ordinary life keeps placing one familiar thing after another into the hands of those who must endure. This is not the peace of ignorance now. That is gone. The village knows enough to know that England is in peril. It knows enough to hear strain in every scrap of news, enough to feel the kingdom shifting even from a distance. And yet, within that knowledge, there remains this smaller peace. A peace made not of certainty, but of nearness, of home, of repetition, of the old order continuing in little ways, even while larger things grow unstable. When you return from the forge at day's end, the house feels more precious than before. Not because it has changed, but because you have. Because now you notice more keenly the warmth waiting within it, the way the firelight touches the wall, the smell of cooked grain and smoke and wool, the sound of your family moving around the room in patterns so familiar that they seem almost part of the structure itself. One child sits cross-legged near the hearth, intent on some tiny object of great seriousness. Another leans against a parent's knee, not quite sleepy, not quite wakeful, living in that soft evening space where the day's edges begin to blur. Someone stirs the pot. Someone folds cloth. Someone asks whether there is enough wood stacked for another cold night. These are not grand moments, but they are the true shape of what people mean when they say they are trying to preserve a life. You feel it in the bowl placed in your hands. Warm, taut, solid, simple, a thing made for use, and all the better for it. You feel it in the closeness of the room, where every person belongs to every other in some quiet, daily way. You feel it in the fact that while kings march and ships land and armies move somewhere beyond the range of village bells, this house still gathers its own people back beneath one roof before dark. And that matters more than any grand speech could say. The children do not understand the full shape of events, but children are often better than adults at understanding the emotional weather of a place. They know when voices carry tension beneath them. They know when laughter comes a little less easily. They know when adults pause too long at the door after hearing footsteps outside. And because they know these things, even without knowing names or causes, they lean more deeply into the signs of safety available to them. A hand on the shoulder, a blanket tucked close, a crust of bread shared, the right to sit near the fire. A familiar voice saying their name in the old tone. These are not small comforts to a child. They are the architecture of the world. So you give them what steadiness you can. A simple task, a quiet correction, a story remembered, an extra moment before sleep. Even now, perhaps especially now, ordinary affection becomes part of the village's defense. Not against spears or horses or claims to crowns, but against the slow unraveling that fear can begin inside a household if left unchecked. Outside, the lane grows dim. The roofs darken. The evening cool settles over the village in a hush broken only by the occasional voice, a dog, a gate, the far-off shifting of animals bedded down for the night. The church stands in silhouette now, no longer anchoring the eye by daylight, but holding its place in another way through memory, through habit, through the knowledge that it will still be there in the morning. This is how continuity survives, not by remaining untouched, but by remaining practiced. Again and again, the same prayer, the same spoon, the same fire tended before sleep, the same doorway barred against the night, the same low words exchanged between those who share a life. Even the smallest actions begin to glow with meaning when the wider world grows uncertain. A shirt mended by firelight, boots set to dry, a child's hair untangled gently before bed, the careful scraping of the pot so nothing is wasted, a cloak hung in the same place it was hung yesterday and will be hung tomorrow if God allows. These things reassure not because they are powerful, but because they are known. They say, the world has not entirely become strange. Not yet. Not here. Not inside these walls. And in the morning, the village offers the same gift again. You wake. The fire is low. The house is close and cold at the edges. Dawn gathers beyond the roofline. For one small moment before memory rushes back, the world feels simple again. Then the mind remembers. Harold, William, the north, the south, the battle not yet fought, or perhaps already underway somewhere beyond sight. But even then, the body begins its old sequence. Rise, dress, stir the fire, eat, open the door, step into the lane. This repetition is not meaningless. It is the thread by which the self is pulled through troubled time. At the well, people still speak in the practical language of village life, whose roof may need patching before heavier weather, whether the hens have begun laying less, how cold the night was, whether old so-and-so's cough has improved. And because no one can speak of war every moment without wearing the soul thin, these conversations matter. They return everyone, briefly, to a scale at which life can still be held in the Hans Deutsch. A neighbor asks after your children. You asked after his mother's joints. Someone remarks on the look of the sky. Someone else notices that a wheel rut near the bend in it. The lane has deepened and should be filled before it worsens. For a little while, kingdom disappears, and only the village remains. This is the return to safe, not a forgetting, a resting place. The forge, too, offers this in its own way. Even when the work bears signs of unease, the labor itself remains grounding. Metal still has to be heated to the same colors. The hammer still must fall cleanly. The tongue still must hold. The hand still must judge by feel and eye and timing. Whatever else the kingdom has become, iron remains honest. There is solace in that. Not enough to banish fear, but enough to narrow it. Enough to say, here is one thing that still obeys a known order. Fire, air, force, patience. Do it well, and the metal answers. Do it poorly, and it does not. No rumor can alter that. And when the work is done, the village receives you back again. A neighbor pauses to exchange a few words. A child chases another through the lane until called back sharply. A dog circles twice and lies down by a doorway. The smell of evening meals drifts from the houses. For a little while, all the old life of the place reasserts itself so convincingly that you could almost imagine the kingdom beyond it has not changed at all. This is why attachment deepens in times of uncertainty, not because places suddenly become more beautiful, but because they reveal more clearly what they have always been giving. The lane you could walk in darkness, the field boundary your feet know without thought, the church path worn by years of going and returning, the voice that answers when you step through your own door, the place where your knife hangs, the chair that creaks in the same place every time someone sits, the child who always leaves something where it should not be, the same small irritations, the same quiet mercies. Together, they become sacred in a way no one would have bothered to name before. And there are gentler moments still. A scrap of laughter at the table when someone says something foolish. A child nearly asleep yet fighting to hear the end of a story. The feel of warm hands after coming in from cold air. A shared look across the room that says more than speech. A pause before the fire when no one is talking and no one needs to. The village lives on such moments, more than on any single proclamation or plan. It is sustained by the countless unrecorded acts of reassurance that pass between people who know one another well enough to soften the day without announcing that they are doing so. Perhaps that is why even prayer sounds different now. Not louder, not more elaborate, only more inward. People bow their heads at the same times, speak the same words, cross themselves in the same old way, but somewhere beneath the repetition is a deeper need. For protection, for preservation, for sons not to be summoned, for husbands to remain at home, for kings to prevail far away so villages may remain villages near at hand. No one says all of that in one breath. No one needs to. God, after all, has heard villages before, and still, the small structure of life holds. A mother braids a child's hair. Someone salts what can be salted. Wood is brought in before night dampens it. Tools are set where they can be found quickly in the morning. The fire is banked. The latch is checked. The room settles. This is not ignorance. This is courage in domestic form. To keep living gently while the world beyond your walls grows less gentle. To keep making food, warmth, order, and affection while knowing they may all soon be tested. To keep the house human. That is a kind of bravery history rarely names, though perhaps it is the bravery most people have always depended on. The children sleep. The adults speak more softly. The day closes around the house. Outside, perhaps the stars are visible, perhaps cloud has gathered, perhaps the same sky that once held the comet now appears innocent again. But no one trusts innocence quite so easily now. And even in these peaceful moments, the world outside grows more uncertain. That uncertainty enters not with a crash, but by thinning the edges of confidence. A rider on the road is no longer only a rider. News from another shire is no longer only news. A pause at the church door, a look exchanged in the lane, a messenger's horse lathered from haste. These things gather meaning more quickly than before. Yet the village resists, becoming only fear. Again and again, it returns to the known pattern. Again and again, it makes itself a place where children can still sleep, where bread can still be shared, where a man can still step in from cold air and find his own life waiting for him in familiar form. This does not stop the storm, but it gives the heart somewhere to stand while the storm approaches. And perhaps that is enough for now. The fire burns. The roof holds. The family's near. The lane still leads where it always led. The church still marks the center. The forge still waits for morning. So the village rests, not in peace exactly, but in continuity. And continuity, in such times, is a kind of peace. For now, that will have to do. For now, it is everything. The news comes at last, and when it comes, it does not sound dramatic. Not at first. No trumpet. No grand proclamation fit for songs. Only a rider on a tired horse. A face drawn thin by road and weather. A few people gathering before they even know why they are gathering. The lane pausing. The village listening. And then the words begin to move from mouth to mouth, each one carrying more weight than the last. King is dead. Harold is dead. The battle in the south is lost. And England, though no one in the village would phrase it so cleanly in the first stunned moments, has begun to pass into other hands. For a while, nothing seems to happen. That is the strange mercy of distant defeat. The roof does not collapse. The fire does not go out. The lane remains where it was. A child still stumbles in the dirt and cries for ordinary reasons. The church still stands. The forge still smells of iron and old heat. The village, in all its visible parts, continues to exist. And yet everything is altered. Not because foreign riders have already entered the lane. Not because the houses burn. Not because your own body has yet been touched by violence. But because something larger than any one household has broken, and everyone can feel the break even from a distance. The old shape of certainty is gone. Harold had become more than a king in these last weeks. He had become a wall in the mind. A figure moving somewhere beyond sight, holding back the future by force of speed and courage and will. So long as he lived, something could still be answered. Something could still be recovered. The North had proven that. The kingdom had been, but not fallen. Now that hope has been struck down with him. The village receives this knowledge quietly. Not because the loss is small, but because it is too large to meet all at once. One man lowers his head and says nothing. A woman who had been carrying water simply stops and stands with the pail still in her hand. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else asks if the news is certain, then regrets asking as soon as the words leave his mouth. It is the kind of question people ask only when they already know the answer they fear is true. By evening, the whole village has heard. The story has already begun its long journey into memory, though no one yet thinks of it that way. A hill in the south, a battle line, a shield wall broken, the king fallen, Norman victory. The details shift from telling to telling, but the shape remains cruelly clear. With Harold dead and England falling into Norman hands, your world has changed forever. That thought comes not as a single blow, but as a slow settling. It finds you while carrying wood, while washing your hands after work, while stepping through your own doorway and seeing the room as you have always seen it, and suddenly also as something fragile, temporary, belonging to a world that has already begun to recede. Inside the house, the fire is lit, the meal is prepared. The children are there, close to the hearth, close to one another, close to the familiar little geography of stool and bowl and blanket and wall. Everything that makes a household feel complete is present. And because it is present, the ache is sharper. You gather your family not in ceremony, not in fear exactly, but in instinct. You need them near. You need the simple proof of their bodies in the room, their voices, their warmth, their ordinary nearness. No one says much at first. Words, like certainty, have become difficult things. A bowl is passed. A child asks some small question and receives a softer answer than usual. A hand reaches to smooth hair back from a face. Someone shifts closer to the fire. These are the same gestures as before, and yet now they carry the weight of preservation, as though each ordinary kindness were saying, "Hold this, hold this, hold this before the world grows stranger still." Outside, darkness comes early or late, depending on the season, but it always comes. Tonight it feels different, not because night itself has changed, but because now the dark seems to contain more than weather and distance. It contains consequence. A new king, perhaps not yet crowned, but already moving toward the place where kings are made. New claims hardened into law. New men imagining English land as theirs by right of victory. New voices, new banners, new demands. Inside, though, the room tries to remain itself. The fire crackles. The walls glow in amber light. The familiar smell of grain and smoke and wool settles over everything. A child grows sleepy. Another resists sleep. Someone clears the bowls. Someone checks the latch. These things go on because households cannot stop, simply because history has done something terrible. But the mind does not rest so easily now. You begin to think not only of what has happened, but of what follows. Who will rule? Who will be dispossessed? Whose oaths will be demanded? Whose sons will be summoned? How far will the change reach? Will it remain in the south, in courts and abbeys and the halls of great men? Or will it travel, steadily and inevitably, into places like yours, where people have never cared much who sat on a distant throne, so long as the harvest came and the village remained whole? The children do not need all these thoughts, so you keep many of them to yourself. That is another shape of care. To hold worry in silence when speaking it aloud would only thicken the air of the house. Instead, you return to what can still be done. A cloak folded, a pot covered, a child wrapped better against the night chill, more wood set close to the hearth for morning. The old actions, the saving actions, the actions by which life tells itself it will continue. And perhaps it will, but not in the same form. This is what the village slowly understands over the next days. Not all at once, not in words everyone agrees upon, but in feeling. England has not ended. The fields are still there. The roads remain. The rivers still move toward the sea. The houses still stand where they stood. And yet the England people knew its loyalties, its expectations, its balance of power, its old confidence that things would go on much as they has suffered a wound from which it cannot simply wake unchanged. The forge remains busy, but the work feels different now. Not frantic. Not yet. Only altered by the knowledge that every ordinary task is taking place inside a new reality. The man who brings a bent fitting for his cart now speaks as though measuring the road more seriously. The woman asking for a knife sharpened wonders whether market days will still be safe if roads grow troubled. An older man stands in the doorway a little too long, warming his hands at the edge of the forge fire, not because he needs anything repaired, but because being alone with his thoughts has grown heavier since the news came. The village speaks more softly now, as if loudness itself might provoke what has not yet arrived. People continue with their tasks, but a hush has settled between them. At the well, in the lane, at the church door, the old ease has thinned. Still, life insists on itself. A baby cries, a loaf burns at one edge, and someone scrapes it clean with a knife. A hen gets loose and must be chased back in laughter too brief to become full joy. A child tracks mud into a room where someone has just swept. A roof leaks where it was mended poorly and must be patched again. These things continue, and in continuing, they offer a strange comfort. Even after great defeat, the small world remains stubborn. It asks to be tended. It refuses to pause for mourning, as long as it still requires hands. That refusal is not cruelty. It is survival. You gather your family, knowing that life will never be the same. But you also know this. You are still here. The fire still burns. The children still breathe in sleep. The roof still holds above you. What has been lost is immense, but what remains must now be guarded with greater care than before. The village begins to think this way too. Not in councils, not in speeches, only in the small turning of attention toward what can be held close. More food dried and stored if possible. Tools checked. Doors barred earlier. Children called in sooner from the lane. Travelers listened to with sharper concentration. News accepted with less argument and more dread. No one says the word conquest yet in the daily rhythm of speech. Or if they do, they say it cautiously, as though naming the thing too clearly might somehow help it take shape. But everyone understands that victory in the south means change in the north will come eventually. Not today, perhaps, not tomorrow, but soon enough. And so a new kind of waiting begins. It is not the waiting of rumor anymore. It is the waiting that follows confirmed loss. The waiting to see how far its shadow reaches. The waiting to discover whether your own lane, your own forge, your own hearth will be left alone, or redrawn into some new order by men you have never seen. That waiting has its own exhaustion. It is quieter than fear, but more persistent. Fear can flare and pass. Waiting settles in the bones. Even prayer changes under such conditions. The words remain the same, but the heart behind them leans differently. People pray not only for victory now, but for endurance. Not only for kings, but for households. Not only for England in the large sense, but for whatever small patch of it they may still be allowed to keep. In the evenings, firelight becomes dearer than ever. Its glow softens the room and makes the world beyond the walls feel less immediate, though never absent. Stories are told more gently. Children are watched more closely. Adults sometimes sit in longer silence than before, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying it would not lighten it. You may find yourself looking at your family with a tenderness sharpened by uncertainty. The child leaning against your side, the familiar lines of a face across the fire, the small hand curled around a blanket in sleep. These details enter memory even while they are still present, as though some part of you has already begun preserving the old world by noticing it more carefully. That, too, is part of loss. When a thing has not yet been taken, but is suddenly seen as something that could be. And yet the house still offers refuge. Not perfect refuge, not lasting refuge perhaps, but enough for one evening, then another. Enough to let the body soften before sleep. Enough to remind you that whatever kings have done, human beings still make warmth for one another in the dark. As the days pass, the village begins to absorb the news into its deeper understanding of itself. Not acceptance, not peace, only adaptation beginning its slow work. This is what has happened. This is where we are now. This is the shape of the world we must wake into tomorrow. The forge stands. The church stands. The lane remains trodden. The fields still wait beyond. But over everything lies the knowledge that England has crossed a threshold and cannot step back across it. At night, when the room has gone quiet and only the fire speaks in little clicks and sighs, the mind drifts farther than it does by daylight. Southward, toward the battle not seen but imagined, toward the king now gone into story, toward the shore where foreign ships once lay and perhaps still lie, toward halls where men in another language are already planning how to divide what they have taken. You cannot know what future they intend, only that it will reach you in time. And as the night falls, you can only wonder what the future holds for your people. Will the old ways remain in hidden corners? Will children yet unborn speak as you speak, pray as you pray, remember what came before? Will the village keep its shape? Will the fields still answer to the same names? Will your sons, if called, return? Will your daughters grow in safety? Will this house remain your house? There are no answers now. Only firelight. Only breath. Only the nearness of those you love and the long dark outside the door. So you sit with that, not resisting it, not mastering it, only sitting, the room warm around you, the kingdom altered beyond you, the future unwritten, but already pressing nearer. The fire settles lower. Someone sleeps. Someone shifts in dreams. The house, still your house for this night at least, holds all of you within it. And because it holds, you endure. Not triumphantly. Not with certainty. Only quietly. As most people always have. England has changed. The old world has begun to drift away. But for now, in this room, under this roof, beside this fire, life has not finished speaking. And so the night deepens. And you listen. In the end, perhaps this is what remains when so much else is broken. Not walls. Not banners. Not the promises of powerful men. Those things rise and fall too easily. They change hands. They burn. They are renamed. They pass from one tongue to another and become something else. But stories move differently. They do not need a throne. They do not require a seal or a sword. They live in breath, in memory, in repetition. They pass from parent to child, from elder to listener, from one winter fire to the next, quietly, persistently, often unnoticed until someone tries to erase the world that made them. And then, suddenly, they become everything. You begin to understand this more clearly now. In the evenings, when the room is warm and the dark presses softly against the walls, the children lean close without fully meaning to. The fire settles lower. The tasks of the day are done, or done enough. And what remains is voice. A story about how the village looked before all this began. A story about the old king. A story about a harvest feast years ago, when the weather held and everyone stayed up later than they should have. A story about a road, a field, a tool, a prayer, a custom, a season. Small things perhaps, but small things are often what make a people recognizable to themselves. The children listen, sometimes seriously, sometimes sleepily, sometimes with the drifting attention of the very young, who seem not to hear and yet remember more than they should. They do not understand the full meaning of defeat. They do not yet know what it means for one world to pass beneath another, but they understand warmth. They understand the safety of familiar voices, and inside that safety, the older world continues reaching them. This is how a people survives, not only in battle, and not even mainly there, but in what it teaches when the battle is over, in what it refuses to forget, in the habits kept, in the names repeated, in the stories told one more time, even when the telling hurts a little. Perhaps that is the quieter kind of endurance. The kind history rarely celebrates because it does not glitter. No horse carries it. No banner marks it. No monk writes it down in golden ink. And yet it lasts, sometimes longer than conquest itself, because a child who learns the old songs may grow into an adult who teaches them again. A son who watches a craft, practiced carefully, may pass the same motions to hands not yet born. A daughter who hears how her people once lived may carry that memory into a future no one in this room can fully imagine. The shape of life may change. The rulers may change. The language at court may change. But beneath all of that, something slower continues. And maybe that is the truth hidden inside these long, uncertain nights. That defeat is not the same as disappearance. That loss is not the same as silence. That a people may bend without wholly breaking if enough of its memory remains alive in ordinary homes. In the darkest moments, stories keep us alive. And as long as we tell them, we remain unbroken. Not untouched, not unchanged, but unbroken in the deepest sense. The sense that matters across generations. The sense that says, we were here, we loved, we worked, we endured, we remembered. The sense that lets the dead travel a little farther by being named. The sense that lets the old world continue breathing inside the new one. Perhaps that is why, even now, you find yourself noticing things differently. The way the firelight warms the wall. The way a child says a word learned from older mouths. The way the lane smells after rain. The way certain customs seem so ordinary that no one would think to call them precious until suddenly they are. You hold these things more gently now, more deliberately, as if each one were not only part of life, but part of memory being formed in real time. And in that quiet act of noticing, something passes forward, not all at once, not like a lesson, more like warmth, more like smoke rising into rafters, more like a hand resting briefly on a shoulder before sleep. The children grow drowsy, their eyes lower, their questions become fewer. The room grows softer around the edges. Outside, the night keeps its own counsel. Inside, the fire lowers itself toward embers, and the old stories settle into the room as naturally as breath. You do not know what the future will do with your people. You do not know how much will be taken, how much will remain, how much will slowly become something new. No one can know that from inside the moment itself. But you know this much. Tonight, the story is still being told. Tonight, The names are still remembered. Tonight, the warmth still gathers the living and the remembered into one small circle of light. And for now, that is enough. More than enough, perhaps. So let the thoughts soften. Let the room grow dimmer. Let the old world drift, not into nothing, but into memory where it can rest and wait and be found again. The fire burns low as you lay your head down. The room has grown quieter by degrees, not all at once, but in the slow and merciful way evening gives itself over to night. What was once flame is now a deep red glow, breathing softly in the hearth. The walls, which held the warmth of voices and movement only a little while ago, now seem gentler, as though the whole house has exhaled. The world outside is vast, larger than any field you have walked, larger than the lane, the village, the church, the forge, the patch of earth your hands have known by season and weather. It contains kings and claims and armies and roads running farther than you will ever travel. It contains storms already breaking elsewhere. It contains futures no one here can see clearly. But for now, you are not out in that vastness. For now, you are here, within walls darkened by smoke and years, beneath a roof that still holds, beside the low-breathing warmth of the hearth, and close to the people whose nearness has made every troubled day bearable. A child shifts in sleep. Someone nearby lets out a long, soft breath. The straw settles faintly beneath weight and blanket. The room does not speak in words now. It speaks in these little sounds of rest, the sounds of bodies that have made it through one more day and have, for a few hours at least, surrendered themselves to safety. You lower yourself onto your pallet and feel the familiar give beneath you. The blanket is rough, but warm enough. The air is cool above it, warmer beneath. Your bones still remember the labor of the day. Your hands still carry, somewhere in them, the shape of tools, the weight of iron, the habit of work. But the work is done now, or done enough. Tomorrow will ask its own things. Tonight asks only that you rest. And perhaps that is the quietest mercy of all, that even in a world unsettled by loss, by distance, by the movement of powerful men, the body still knows how to return to simple needs: warmth, stillness, breath, darkness soft enough to enter without fear. The house holds these things carefully, not perfectly, not forever, but truly. Across the room, the last of the firelight touches familiar shapes. A stool, a hanging cloth, a bowl left ready for morning, a pair of shoes set near the wall. The small, ordinary objects of a life that has not vanished, only changed around the edges. And because they are still here, because they still wait where they should wait, the mind loosens its grip a little. There is no more use now in holding tightly to every question. Not tonight. Not while the embers are red and the house is quiet and those you love are under the same roof. Outside, the dark goes on and on. Beyond the village, beyond the fields, beyond the roads and rivers, beyond the places where men fought and fell and altered the course of England, the night stretches without end. But inside this room, the night has a smaller shape. It is made of blankets and banked fire. It is made of sleeping children and tired hands. It is made of silence shared rather than suffered. You let your eyes drift toward the hearth one last time. The coals pulse softly. They do not burn high anymore. They do not need to. Their work is gentler now, to keep a little warmth alive, to carry the room through until dawn, to glow rather than blaze. There is something comforting in that, the quiet endurance of low fire. Not spectacle, not triumph, only continuation. Perhaps the same is true of people, of households, of memory. Not everything survives by burning brightly. Some things survive by remaining warm in the dark, passed carefully from one pair of hands to another, from one voice to another, from one winter night to the next. Craft, a prayer, a name, a way of speaking, a story told low beside the hearth, until it settles so deeply into the listener that it is no longer merely heard, but kept. You close your eyes, and the room does not disappear. It remains around you in other ways, in heat against your face, in the closeness of shared breathing, in the faint scent of smoke caught in woolen wood, in the knowledge that if you reached out in the dark, the world you belong to would still be near. This is what peace can look like in difficult times. Not the peace of certainty. Not the peace of knowing the future will be kind. Only the peace of one protected moment, one held space, one night in which the storm has not yet entered the room. And one protected moment is sometimes enough to carry a person farther than they would have believed. Thoughts of the day begin to loosen and drift. The messenger on the road, the king in the south, the names spoken in lowered voices, the shape of the village lane in morning light, the sound of the hammer at the forge, the warmth of the bowl in your hands, the child leaning against your side, the church standing quiet at the center of the village, the stories told after dark. All of it now feels softer, as though memory itself has begun wrapping the day in cloth before storing it away. You do not need to solve anything here. You do not need to hold the whole of England in your mind. You do not need to know what tomorrow brings, or who will rule, or how far change will travel, or what name later generations will give to this time. Those things belong to daylight, and even in daylight they resist clear answers. Here, in the last quiet of the night, another truth matters more. That life was lived here. That warmth was made here. That love, in its plain village forms, existed here without fanfare, and without witness beyond those who shared it. That this, too, was history. Not only the battles and banners, but the breathing room beneath them. The hidden room. The room where people endured by remaining human with one another. The fire lowers further. The red heart of it grows smaller, steadier, calmer. Outside, perhaps the wind moves over the roof. Perhaps frost gathers again. Perhaps the stars are clear above the village, or perhaps cloud has hidden them. It hardly matters now. The night beyond the walls may be wide, but the night within them has become gentle. You feel sleep coming not as a sudden drop, but as a soft tide. First, the body grows heavier. Then thoughts lose their edges. Then the need to follow one idea into the next quietly fades. What remains is warmth, darkness, and the steady reassurance that you are not alone. And somewhere inside that softening, one final comfort remains. The stories will live on, not because anyone has promised it, not because history is fair, not because conquest cannot wound what it touches, but because stories are carried by people, and people carry what they love longer than power expects. A child who hears a name may speak it again years later. A craft shown patiently by firelight may pass into other hands. A memory held gently in one generation may become belonging in the next. The old world may not remain unchanged, but it will not vanish cleanly either. Too much of it has already settled into voice, gesture, prayer, memory, habit, and love. And so you rest with that. Not a grand hope, not a loud one, only a quiet, ember-like hope, the kind that glows rather than shines. The kind that asks for no audience, the kind that remains. You close your eyes, knowing that the stories will live on, passed from one generation to the next. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Enough for memory to keep breathing. Enough for the old world to leave its warmth inside the new one. Enough for the people who come after to feel, even faintly, that they belong to something older, deeper, and more human than conquest alone. The room is almost entirely dark now. The embers are low. The house is still. The day is gone. Tomorrow has not yet asked anything of you. For now, you are warm. For now, you are held. For now, the night is kind. So let it deepen. Let the fire sink lower. Let the house grow softer around you. Let the old names drift like smoke into sleep. Let the lane, The forge, the church, the fields, the voices. Stories all settle into that quiet place where nothing is lost at once, and everything rests. For a while. And if the future is already on its way, let it wait outside. A little longer. Just for this night. Just for these last few breaths. Just until sleep carries you gently beyond the reach of questions, into warmth, into silence, into rest.